Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. While I mostly deal with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, I do occasionally dabble in design, and that's what this video is about. I want to show you how to actually build out a responsive card component in Figma that you can use in your designs. Now, I've done a video explaining the components themselves and how they work. This video is more of an application of that previous one. So if you haven't watched that first one, go ahead and do that first. But what we can see is I can drag out an instance of this, and now I get access to a bunch of things about this card instance over here in the sidebar. I can show or hide a badge, I can show or hide the image, or select which image I want to show or hide the indicator, switch out the text from here or from over here. And then over here I've got this nested button component in here as well. Here I can decide whether or not it's filled, what kind of color it should be, if it should be primary or secondary. I can swap out the text here or here, show or hide the icon, and then pick a different icon if I want. All of this is possible by using all the options available to me with component properties. We've got both variants, and then we've also got three new ones that I went over in that last video: instance, Boolean, and text. All right, let's jump right in. All right, so we're going to build out this entire card component from scratch. We're going to do it a component at a time. Now, while I say it's from scratch, I do have some text styles over here and some colors, just so we've got something to choose from for each of these items. But other than that, it's totally from scratch. So I'm going to start with a frame. So I'll hit F and then just click and then hit Shift A to turn it into an auto layout. And then let's go ahead and grab this text and add it in here. We'll say something like button text. So you can see that on the left over here, I've got a frame with button inside of it. Now, I might want to have an icon as well, so let's go ahead and add some icons as well. And I've got Phosphor Icons as a plugin here. And let's see, we might want like some kind of money for like a buy now button. And let's see, maybe is there like an airplane for send? I might also want an arrow. Let's see if they've got like a small caret that points to the right. That'll work. And then maybe like an article for a blog post or something like that. Okay, so I've got all four of those. Let's close that down for now. Okay, so here we go. We got all these set. What I want to do is actually create individual components out of these, so multiple components, and this will allow us to basically swap them on our button. So we'll do that here in a second. But for now, what I'm going to do is just grab one of these if I can. Let's grab one of these right here, and I'm just going to add it to this frame. Now what I need to do is make sure that this is set to be next to each other. I'm going to actually drag this button over here, and then we'll put everything in the very center. Let's change this spacing to something like 14, and we'll do like, I don't know, 30, something like that. Let's make sure that this text is using one of my things, and it is this button. That's perfect. Let's change the fill, though, of the text to this background color. We'll do the same thing. Actually, let's just change all of these because I'm always going to want them this color, I think. All right, then what I want to do is change the frame background here, and we will change it to this accent right here. All right, so there's a basic button already set. Maybe let's add a little bit of border radius to it. And then what I'm going to do is create a component out of this. So you can do this in a bunch of different ways, but why don't I just click right here, and that's probably the easiest. All right, let me collapse some of these just so that we don't have to stare at all that and rename this to something like button. All right, now we're going to want some different variants here, and sometimes they will have like different background colors or different borders or that kind of thing. So with this entire component selected, I'm going to click Add Variant, which will create a component set. Now what I want to do is let's have, first of all, just a difference in whether or not they're filled. So that will be an easy toggle to create. So I'm going to come over this way, and let's change this maybe to this. Oh, no, we're not changing that yet. We're going to remove this and add a stroke. All right. Almost forgot what I just said. Let's go to something like 5, and now we've got a filled and a not filled option. So I'm going to come over here, first of all, click the entire component set, and change this property name. This is a variant property to something like filled. And now what I can do is select this one and say that this is true, and select this one and say that this is false. Whenever you have a variant that is either true or false, it creates a little toggle so that when I grab an instance of this, I can just decide whether or not it's filled. Now, when it comes to deciding between the different options available to you on a component set, when it comes to properties, I typically think of variants, which are kind of the original, the OG of components, as essentially the same thing with different styling properties. That's the best way to think about them now because we've got all these instance properties as well. So in this case, these are the same thing, they're just styled differently. All right, so it's not like I've added or removed an element or changed around anything. All I've done is style it differently. However, when it comes to these are going to be actually whether or not something's visible, which is what I think this should be called the visible not Boolean because it's a little confusing, because this just hides or shows something. Instant swap means when it's there, I can swap out which icon, for instance, it's showing. So it's an entirely different thing. It's not just something styled differently, which is what I would choose a variant for. And with the text, that's fairly basic. You're just assigning it to one of the text frames and letting you switch those out. So let's add those in a second here. But the next thing I want to do is grab both of these and duplicate them. Now we're going to change up the actual styling once again. So I'm going to come over here and let's see. Let's change all of this. Actually, that's the fill. Let's come down to the selection here, and let's use this secondary color. So in this case, what I'm going to do, because this is, again, a different styling, but the same things are there, I'm going to add another property, except in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it type. All right, and we'll say primary is the default. I'm going to grab both of these then, and we'll change these to secondary. And then with this one, I need to make sure that this is set to true for filled, and that this one is set to false for filled. All right, that means when I drag one of these out like this, I can now choose between whether or not it's filled and whether or not it's primary. All right, that should work for me. So we've just used the variants so far. Now what I want to do is actually apply some of those instance properties to this. If I select this text frame and click this, you can see that it's going to give me all 4 matching layers selected. Now what I can do is come over here, and this layer is not what I want. This is whether or not it's visible. That's the Boolean. What I want is this content right here. So if I click this, I can now assign this something like button text, and then I can give it its value. In this case, it happens to be the same thing, but obviously it doesn't have to be. It's just whatever the starting text would be in there. The other thing I want to do is on these icons, I'll click here again. Here, sometimes I want them to show, and sometimes I don't want them to show. So when I want them to show, that would be this layer right here. This is that Boolean property. A second ago I mentioned I think this should be called the visibility, because basically it's just showing whether or not this thing is visible at all. So true or false. So I'm going to come in here and say show icon, and we'll set it to true by default. Click property, and we'll add one more, and then I'll talk you through what we're doing. So if I click over here and click 4 matching layers again, this time I actually want to come over here. You can see I already get this drop down. But if I click inside here, I can now create an instance swap for different icons. So let's just call this icon. All right, now actually if I add all of these, I think to a frame, it will group them, but we'll do that in a second. So let's drag this out and I'll walk you through what we just did. This toggle is actually a variant. It's whether or not it's filled. And I think that's a little confusing because again, this is a toggle too, but that's if something visible or not. That's the Boolean property. This primary and secondary dropdown is what we've already looked at. Now I can also change out the button text here. So I could say here, change it here. I can also come over here and I can start clicking and change here. If I were to reselect this, you can see that that shows up over this way as well. Whether or not I want to show the icon is that Boolean instance swap, and then this icon is a swap between these different icons. Now I think, like I mentioned, I think if I add all of these to a frame and I call this something like icons, let's fill this with something so I can actually see it. I think if I come over here now, let's check. Can I actually, select all this? Yeah, so it actually puts it all in the same frame, which means it auto selects that frame for me. All right, cool. So we'll do that. All right, so those are all set together, and now everything should be basically working as I want. Now, obviously, there might be some hover states or things like that, so that could be something I add to this as well, like hover states for each of these options. I'm not going to do that in this case because we're trying to keep it pretty basic and just kind of work this out in a real-life example. All right, so we'll keep that as a starting point. The other thing I might want is that a little badge on the card. Maybe it would be for like a category or a special deal or something like that. So let's do the same thing here. In this case, I'm going to hit T and grab a text frame here, and we'll say something like category, or how about we just call this badge. I'm going to come over here and switch this to my badge style as well, and then let's hit Shift A to turn this into an auto layout. And to start with, I might just want this to be like a stroke, an outline stroke. So maybe we'll start with something like that. How about 3, 4, and then we'll put everything into the middle. Now here I might want this to be a little bit more spaced out side to side and maybe a little tighter up and down. I think that works for me. Maybe I'll change this back to 2. So that's a good starting point. I want to change this text obviously to something that's in my color palette, so we'll just keep it the same. Now with all that selected, I'll hit Option or Command Option K to turn it into a component. I can also click up here or do it from the right-click menu, and we'll rename this. So let's call this badge. And then I want to add another variant because I might want this to be styled differently or add a different property to this. In this case, let's go ahead and grab both of these here. And the first thing I'm going to do is add a text property. So we'll call this something like badge text, and we'll add that there. Okay. The other thing I might want to do is have one that's filled and one that's not filled. So let's keep the same structure where we have the filled one first. So I'll come in here and add that. And then let's see over here. Let's see, I guess let's keep that the same, but let's switch up the text color itself. So I'll come in here. Sure, that works. Okay, so I'm going to have, let's grab the component set itself, change up the name of this property to something like filled, and then this one here will be true, and this one here will be false. That should give us a nice toggle. All right, so we'll just keep between those two. I could add different colors as well, but then we're just duplicating the same work we just did on the button. But now you can see filled, or I can change around the badge text to something else. All right, so we got both of those things set. The next thing I think we'll do is actually just build out the card itself. So I'm going to hit F and click to give myself a frame. And then let's hit, let's see, let me just turn it straight into a component right now. We'll just call this card. First thing I'm going to do is change this out to something like 15 for the radius and the fill color to be my actual fill color. Next, what I want to do is start adding in some of these components. So for instance, let's say I've got this badge up top that I might want to add inside of here. Now, is this an auto layout? It is not. All right, so now it is. All right, I'll add this in here. This needs a little bit more spacing and stuff, so I'll come in here. We'll do like 25 and 25. I think that should work. The next thing I want to do is add a possible image. So I'll hit Shift P, and I'm going to look at my Unsplash plugin here, and let's just look at like, let's do mountains. All right, how about that? All right, I'm just going to drag a bunch of these out, and it's going to take a while to download these, but that will give me something to swap between. So I'm going to grab all of these if I can and make them much smaller. Let's do the same thing here. Make this much smaller. All right. And did I already add that one? I don't think I did. Okay. So we got all these set. Oh, I did. Okay. And I'm going to do the same thing I did with these icons here. For each of these, I actually want to make these components. That might seem a little bit odd, but the reason I'm doing that is because it gives me the ability to basically swap these out just like I did with my icons. So let's come over here. I'm going to come over here and click Create Multiple Components. And maybe we should name these to like Mountain 1. This could be Mountain 2. And this could be Mountain 3. So I've got all those set. I'm going to hit F, put these all in a frame so that when I select one, I kind of get them naturally selected together on my instant swap like we did with the button. Okay, so that's set now. Let's come over here and I'm going to drag one of these in, if I can, to this card. Let's see, can I get it in there? All right, it's not letting me drag it in for some reason, so I'll just add it in like that from the sidebar. All right, now I've got this set to a set width here. Let's do something more like that, and this will be an optional image, which we'll hide it as an option in just a second. All right, now this itself, make sure that we've clipped the content. There we go. Okay. Now I also will want some text in here possibly, so I'll hit T and click text, and in this case I want to switch between that to my title. I'll say something like title here, and let's copy that and add another one. And in this case I want my body, and we'll say body here. And let's see, I might want some kind of subtitle. So let's copy this down one more time. Do I have a subtitle? I've got this small. We'll name this our subtitle. Maybe this is like a date for the post or something like that. And then at the very end here, I want to drag in one of these buttons. So let me drag this in down here. All right, so that's our basic card set up and ready to go. I might want to add a couple things to it. Obviously, it doesn't look great right now either. So I'm going to do a couple things. Inside of here, I'm going to grab both of these and hit Shift A to create an auto layout. So those are kind of tucked together. I'm going to do the same thing here so that these are tight and next to each other as well. I'll reduce this to something like 5. And then I think the rest of those are good. Now what I'm going to do is, since this is all an auto layout itself, I'm going to space this out by like 25. That way these two stay grouped together, these two stay grouped together, and all of these are separated by 25-ish. The other thing we're going to do, I think, is swap out which one this is by default. So let's change this to like this, and I guess that's fine for now. All right, something like that. And then this badge as well. Let me go ahead and say it's not going to be filled. I like it something more like that. Now with the card itself, I've got components inside of components, but what I might want to do is actually decide sometimes I want this to be visible and sometimes I don't want it to be visible. Probably the same thing with this badge. Now what I'm going to do is select this here, and in this case, I'm going to come over here and let's see, to the layer, which is whether or not something is visible. I'll click that. This is a Boolean property, and I'm going to say show badge. Sure, that works. Same thing here. Grab this image right here. We'll come over to the layer and create a new property. And we'll say show image, and by default we'll set it to true. That's fine. The title will probably always be there. This may or may not, so I'll come over here again to the layer, click that again. This is another Boolean instance property, and I'll say show subtitle. Sure, that works. I think the rest of that is basically the same. I'm always going to have some kind of button on here. I might also want to create this as an instance swap though, so we can swap between our pictures. So in this case, I'm going to come over here and click here, and we'll say like mountain or something like that. That way you can choose the mountain you want. Now before we drag this out, maybe let's make one more thing that will just be shown or not shown, and that would be some kind of like, maybe it's like a sold or popular or some kind of badge like that. So I'm going to copy this down and let's see. Let's rename this to something like, I don't know, something like indicator. All right, actually, I think this might be easier just to start from scratch. So let's get rid of that. I'll hit O, and that will give me a circle. And I'll come over this way, and let's do this color right here to start with. And so that we've got a little bit more room, maybe I'll come down here. And inside here, we'll basically have some kind of text. First, I'll hit Shift-A so that I've got this as an auto layout. I'll hit T, and then click inside here, and that should give me the opportunity, maybe, to add this. You know what? I think what I need to do is take this frame, hit T, add inside of here, and we'll say something like sold or something. All right. Let's see this badge. Let's make it the small type, I think, instead, right here. And then what I'll do is come in here and make sure that these are always going to be the same and that this is like 100 or something. Let's also fill this with this color. That'll work. And then let's manually set this. So fixed width, fixed height, and we'll say something like 60 and 60. All right, now let's put everything in the middle, and then we can decide whether or not basically this is shown. So first of all, I'm going to create a component out of this, and we'll name this something like indicator, like I mentioned a second ago. And I want to just change up a couple things. So first of all, I'll add a text instance property where I say like text. Sure, that works. Let's see, anything else I need? Not really, all right? Not for that individual component. What I'm going to do now is drag this over here, and then I'm going to actually create this, make this position absolute so I can put it anywhere I want in this frame. I'm going to put it right in this corner, right like that, something like that. And now I want to do one more thing, which is decide whether or not this thing can even be shown. So you might remember that it's going to be in the layer here. This is whether or not something is visible. It's a Boolean property, and I want to create a new one. I'll just say show indicator. Sure, that works. All right, so now I've got all of those as options. If I were to go ahead and get some kind of frame up here, maybe I grab like this MacBook 16-inch, all right? Now what I might do is just drag this card over here, or probably what I would do, assuming that this would be on some kind of different page, is I would hit Shift-I and then start searching. So in this case, I might start searching for card or something like that. And I think I need to be over in my components. So here I can just drag this out, and I've got this where I can just do everything I want, manipulate it, everything over here in the sidebar. So for instance, maybe I want to show the badge or maybe I don't. Maybe I want to show the image or maybe I don't. If I do show the image, I want it to be Mountain 2 perhaps. Maybe I want the indicator or I don't. Then what I can do is click inside here as well. Same kind of thing. Here I can say whether or not I want this to be filled, what kind of type I want it to be, what I want it to be the button text, show the icon or hide the icon. I can also come over here and select all these. Now you can see that I don't actually get anything in the sidebar over here because we never added those as text properties. So let's do that, and then we'll call this good after that. So I'm going to grab this, and we'll come over here, and we'll call this title, and this will be our subtitle, and I'm grabbing the content because these are all text. So we'll say subtitle, and same thing over here for the body. So let's come over here and create a new property, and we will call this body. All right, so with all those set, I should be able to come over here, and now they show down here as well. So I could say like awesome blog post. All right, and then the subtitle could be like whatever today is. All right, the 17th. And then down here, let me grab some lorem ipsum, and I'll generate some paragraphs, and I'll paste it in there. I think there's also a plugin in Figma as well, and you can see here, like in this case, I realized, hey, this isn't exactly how I want it. Instead of changing on the instance, let me come over here and change it here. So in this case, I need to come over here, and we're going to set this to a fixed width. In this case, I'm going to drag this out so that it's the same size here. All right, and then I want to set this to auto height. All right, like that. And you can see as I was changing it over here, you can see it was already changing over this way. And maybe I also want to change this back just for styling purposes. We'll change this to my type of primary. And let's see, I don't need to send it. Let's change it to sure. And let's call it read more. Actually, didn't I have an article? I did have an article. All right, just like that. So you can see how very quickly you can get this thing prototyped, and then wherever you're using this, you can just drag it all throughout your site. Now you can see here I'm using it for a blog post, but if you have multiple pages with the same basic card with different structures, maybe I'd have another one on a different page. This one I might want to hide the badge entirely and the image. I wouldn't want to show the subtitle, and maybe I'd want to change around this kind of items as well. Maybe I'd hide the indicator as well. Now in this case, I've got this frame. Clearly, I didn't do that correctly, so I'd need to update that. Instead of just hiding the image, I'd want to make sure that the layer property was on the entire frame that it was in. But now this looks very different, but it's the same basic component. And if I want to update it, I can update it all in one place instead of updating it on multiple pages in my design. So I hope that's helpful for you. Not the prettiest card I've ever created, but I think it gives you an idea of how this is actually used in real life. You've got components inside of components that are all working together so that you have a lot of flexibility as you build out your page. And what's especially helpful is as you have to update things, you can update everything in one individual place. And lastly, before I let you go, whenever you're looking at an individual component, you can very quickly get back to the original by coming over here and clicking this right here, and it takes you straight to the main component, even if you're on a different page. I hope that was a really helpful practice of what I showed you in the previous video I did on components. This is an actual real-life use case where you'd actually build out this entire card and then let it kind of work for you in your design. If you enjoyed this, the biggest thing you could do to help my channel would just be to like the video and then share it with somebody else. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Happy coding.